What you're about to hear is the part of history that textbooks usually mention briefly or avoid completely. It is not a legend, a myth, or a dramatic exaggeration. It is the video of a single night when ordinary human decisions collided with long-ignored tensions. A night so deceptively small in scale that no one present could possibly imagine the global consequences that would follow. And yet, by sunrise, the trajectory of the modern world had already begun to bend. This story explores a historical moment whose real impact was far greater than most people realize. On the surface, it appears to be a local tragedy involving a single assassination in a distant corner of Europe. In reality, it became the spark that ignited the deadliest global conflict humanity had ever experienced up to that point. The event itself lasted only seconds, but its consequences unfolded over decades. To understand why this night mattered so much, we must first reconstruct the fragile world that existed just before it happened. At the time the story begins, the early 20th century world was shaped by power struggles, rigid empires, and beliefs very different from those we hold today. Europe was dominated by monarchies that ruled vast multi-ethnic territories held together by force rather than unity. Nationalism was rising rapidly, especially in regions where different cultures were forced to coexist under imperial control. Political leaders feared rebellion more than war, seeing internal fracture as a greater threat than external conflict. Armies were expanded not only for defense, but to project strength at home and abroad. Diplomacy often served appearances more than resolution. Beneath the surface, societies were being conditioned to accept confrontation as inevitable. The world looked stable, but stability was an illusion sustained by pressure rather than trust. Most historians agree on the basic facts of what happened on June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, heir to one of Europe's most powerful empires, was assassinated alongside his wife during a state visit. These facts are not disputed, nor are they controversial, but facts alone do not explain why this moment shattered global peace. They describe the event, not its meaning. They explain what happened, but not why it mattered so profoundly, or why it spiraled so far beyond the streets where it occurred. The assassination was symbolic as much as it was violent, striking at the idea of imperial permanence. It exposed how fragile authority had become. More importantly, it revealed how quickly political systems could abandon restraint once fear was activated. The common narrative taught in schools suggests that World War I began because a Serbian nationalist killed an Austrian archduke, triggering a chain reaction of alliances. While this explanation is technically accurate, it hides more than it reveals. It frames the war as inevitable, as if nations were helpless passengers carried forward by forces beyond their control. This version quietly removes responsibility from the people in power who made conscious choices. It turns deliberate decisions into historical accidents. The truth is far more unsettling. Behind official outrage and public mourning were private calculations, political anxieties, and long-standing strategic ambitions that transformed a single act of violence into a global catastrophe few fully understood at the time. Behind public records and official stories were leaders who saw opportunity as much as danger. Austria-Hungary viewed the assassination not only as a crime, but as a chance to silence Serbian nationalism before it spread further and weakened the empire from within. Russia feared losing influence in the Balkans and appearing weak to its allies at a moment when prestige mattered deeply. France feared isolation in a hostile Europe, while Britain feared the collapse of the delicate balance of power it had spent decades maintaining. None of these motivations were rooted in justice or morality. They were driven by survival instincts, prestige, insecurity, and a growing fear of decline. As pressure increased, leaders across Europe were forced to choose between preserving their power or risking humiliation and collapse. Mobilization plans, once triggered, became almost impossible to reverse without appearing weak or unprepared. Alliances that were meant to guarantee security instead created obligation, panic, and momentum toward war. Diplomacy collapsed not because it was impossible, but because it was abandoned too early in favor of decisive action. Confidence in quick victory replaced caution. The belief that war would be short blinded governments to the immense human cost that modern industrial warfare would inflict. The final outcome reshaped nations, destroyed centuries-old systems, and created an entirely new global order. World War I led to the collapse of 4 major empires and redrew borders across Europe and the Middle East in ways that continue to shape conflicts today. It caused unprecedented loss of life and introduced industrial warfare on a scale humanity had never witnessed. Entire generations were scarred physically and psychologically. More importantly, the war destabilized societies so deeply that it paved the way for World War II, ideological extremism, and decades of global instability that followed.
The deeper meaning of Napoleon's fall lies not in a single battle, but in the nature of power itself. His mistake was not a lack of intelligence or courage, but overconfidence in a system that ignored economic reality, human behavior, and the limits of control. The continental system assumed that nations would sacrifice their own interests indefinitely for imperial obedience. History proved otherwise, and the cost of that assumption was catastrophic. This story also reveals something timeless about leadership and empire. Napoleon was a master of war, but war alone cannot sustain empires. Economic stability, popular support, and flexible alliances matter just as much as battlefield victories. When those foundations erode, even the strongest armies cannot hold everything together for long. The patterns visible in Napoleon's downfall still appear in the modern world. Economic sanctions, trade wars, military overreach, and the belief that pressure alone can force compliance continue to shape global politics today. Leaders still underestimate how complex systems respond to stress and how unintended consequences accumulate over time, often beyond anyone's control. The most important detail, however, is the one often left until last. Napoleon did not lose because fate turned against him or because history demanded his fall. He lost because one strategic decision triggered a chain reaction he could no longer control. Once that process began, every attempt to fix it only deepened the damage, locking him into a path with no easy exit. Napoleon's empire did not collapse in a single moment of drama, but through a sequence of choices that felt reasonable at the time and disastrous in hindsight. Understanding these moments helps us see history not as distant events, but as warnings written in human behavior. If you want more stories that go beyond surface-level history and explore the decisions that truly shaped the world, make sure to like and subscribe.